Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that has shaken not just West Africa, but also sent tremors across global finance, from Paris to Washington, from the gold mines of Burkina Faso to the boardrooms of Wall Street. It's a story about power, wealth, independence, and the age-old struggle between Africa and its former colonial rulers. Our topic today is Ibrahim Traoré versus French banks, the $400 billion gold revolution. At the center of this story is a young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, copyright of Burkina Faso. At just 36 years old, he has emerged as one of the most talked about figures in Africa. He represents a generation that is tired of being exploited, tired of foreign interference, and determined to rewrite the rules of economic power. And what makes his fight particularly significant is the natural wealth beneath Burkina Faso's soil of gold. Burkina Faso may not sound like one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but appearances are deceiving. This landlocked nation in West Africa is sitting on some of the richest gold deposits on the continent. Every year, billions of dollars worth of gold leaves its soil, and yet, the average Burkina Faso copyright citizen lives on just a few dollars a day. How can this be? Where does all the gold money go? The answer leads us straight into a confrontation between Ibrahim Traoré, copyright, and the French banking system, a confrontation that could change not just Burkina Faso, but the financial map of Africa and beyond. Let's begin with the background. For decades, West African nations were tied to the French colonial financial system. Even after independence, they continued to use a currency called the CFA franc. This currency was not controlled by Africans, it was pegged to the French treasury, giving France significant power over African economies. To many Africans, this system felt like neo-colonialism in disguise, freedom on paper, but economic control in practice. Now, imagine this. A country like Burkina Faso, producing nearly 70 to 80 tons of gold every year, valued at over $4 billion annually, sees most of its wealth leaving through multinational corporations, foreign banks, and complex trading systems that benefit outsiders far more than locals. France, with its banks, has historically played a key role in this structure. So when Traoré copyright rose to power in 2022, amid a wave of anger against corruption, terrorism, and economic stagnation, he didn't just talk about reform. He spoke about revolution, and not only a military one but an economic revolution centered on gold sovereignty. Let's picture this moment clearly. A young African leader stands up and says, "Why should French banks hold our reserves? Why should Paris decide the value of our currency? Why should billions in gold leave our country, while our people remain poor?" This is the essence of the $400 billion gold revolution. And yes, you heard that number correctly. If you add up the decades of gold wealth extracted from Burkina Faso and its neighbors, the figure runs into hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, Traoré copyright is not just questioning the system, he is actively building an alternative. Reports from Ouagadougou, the capital, suggest that his government is pushing for local refining of gold so that Burkina Faso exports not raw gold ore, but processed and finished gold bars. That means more jobs, more revenue, and more bargaining power. But that's only step one. Step two is even bigger. Creating a new African monetary system independent of French banks. Traoré copyright, along with leaders from Mali and Niger, two other countries rich in resources and also in conflict with France, has announced moves toward a common currency. This is revolutionary because it directly threatens the CFA franc, a system France has used to maintain influence since the 1940s. So we have to ask, what happens if Africa really breaks free of this financial chain? And what happens when African leaders say to French banks, "Hands off our gold"? Now, let's shift gears for a moment and look at the global picture, especially the United States. Why should Americans care about what's happening in Burkina Faso? The answer is, because gold is not just a mineral, it is the backbone of global finance. In times of crisis, investors run to gold. In times of inflation, central banks buy gold. And recently, we've seen a surge in gold demand worldwide, particularly by countries like China, Russia, and even the US itself. Here's the twist. If African nations like Burkina Faso stop selling gold cheaply to French banks and start controlling their own markets, the price of gold globally could spike. This would affect not only Europe but also Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, and the entire U.S. economy. Consider this: the United States has long projected power not just through its military, but through the dollar. The dollar's strength is partly based on the perception that America has stable reserves and global trust. But if a wave of African nations decide to back their own new currency with gold, suddenly the monopoly of the US dollar looks less secure. This is not speculation. In fact, central banks around the world bought record amounts of gold in recent years. Why? Because they see the dollar system facing challenges. The war in Ukraine, sanctions against Russia, and rising tensions with China have made many countries nervous about holding dollars. Gold looks safer. And if Africa adds its massive reserves into this equation, the financial balance of power could start to tilt. Now, let's come back to Traoré copyright confrontation with French banks. The French financial system, through the CFA franc, works like this. African countries are required to deposit a significant portion of their foreign reserves into the French treasury. This gives France control over liquidity, foreign exchange, and essentially, the economic heartbeat of 14 African nations. Critics say this system is modern slavery, an invisible chain around Africa's neck. But what happens when leaders like Traoré copyright say, no more? Already, Burkina Faso has cut military ties with France. French troops have been asked to leave. The country has instead moved closer to Russia and other non-Western partners. And in the financial sphere, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are openly discussing the creation of a gold-backed currency. Think about that for a second. In a world where most currencies are backed by nothing but trust and government promises, a gold-backed African currency could become extremely attractive, not just in Africa, but globally. It would be real money, tied to tangible wealth. This is why French banks are panicking. Because if Burkina Faso and its allies succeed, France loses not only billions in economic control but also centuries of political influence. Let's pause and compare this situation to the United States again. America also faced a similar debate decades ago. In 1971, under President Richard Nixon, the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, meaning the dollar was no longer backed by gold. From then on, the dollar became a fiat currency valuable because the U.S. government says so, not because it can be converted into gold. This gave America enormous flexibility. It could print money, finance wars, and expand its global influence. But it also created risks: inflation, debt, and dependence on global trust. Now imagine, while the US dollar is backed by faith, an African currency backed by gold suddenly enters the market. Which one do you think global investors might start to prefer in a time of uncertainty? That's the revolutionary potential of Traoré copyright's move. Of course, challenges remain. It's not easy to build a new currency. It's not easy to stand up to powerful banks and governments. Burkina Faso faces threats from terrorism, internal instability, and external pressure. Western powers are unlikely to watch quietly as their influence slips away. We've seen in history how leaders who challenge the global financial order often face serious pushback. But Traoré copyright has one advantage: he is not alone. Mali and Niger are with him. Guinea has also taken independent steps. And across Africa, there is a rising tide of youth demanding sovereignty, control over resources, and an end to exploitation. This is more than just one man's battle. It is a generational shift. So, what does this mean for ordinary Africans? If successful, the $400 billion gold revolution could mean more schools, better hospitals, infrastructure, and jobs. It could mean that the wealth of the land finally benefits the people of the land. It could mean Africa no longer needs to beg for aid, because it controls its own wealth. And what does it mean for France? A massive loss, not only economically, but also symbolically. Losing control of the CFA franc means losing the last grip of empire. And for the United States, it means competition. A new gold-backed system challenges the dominance of the dollar. It forces America to rethink its global financial strategy. Now let's tie everything together. The story of Ibrahim Traoré copyright versus French banks is not just about Burkina Faso. It's about Africa waking up. It's about a continent that has been exploited for centuries finally saying, enough. This fight is about $400 billion in gold. Yes, but it's also about dignity, sovereignty, and the future of global power. Will France let go easily? Unlikely. Will the US be concerned? Absolutely. Will African youth continue to support leaders who promise real independence? Without a doubt. We are living through a turning point in history. In the years to come, when people talk about the global shift in wealth and power, they may look back and say it began here in the gold mines of Burkina Faso, with a young soldier named Ibrahim Traoré copyright who dared to challenge the might of French banks. So, as you watch this story unfold, remember, gold is not just a shiny metal. It is power. It is history. And right now, in Africa, it is revolution. Stay tuned, because this battle is only just beginning. And that's our deep dive into Ibrahim Traoré versus French banks, the $400 billion gold revolution. If you found this video engaging, hit that like button, subscribe for more global insights, and let me know in the comments, do you think Africa can truly break free from French financial control? And if a gold-backed African currency emerges, how will the world respond? Until next time, stay informed, stay aware, and keep questioning the world around you.